So it's happened again. Somebody else who our security services have been concerned about has gone out and committed an atrocity. In this case, murdering 3 people in a park in Reading. And we hear, why aren't the security services doing more? Well, they've got 3,000 people on their very, very high priority list, another 30,000 that they're concerned about. And I guess the real truth is that unless we treble the size of our security services, there is a limit to what they can do. But that's been one of the big debates that we've heard today. Another big debate, of course, is the media favourite about mental illness. They're very, very keen, as quickly as they can, to say this was about mental illness. They don't really want to talk about jihadism or any other potential problem. And in response to it all, what do we get? We get the Prime Minister saying that we must look at this and we must learn some of the lessons from this. How many times have we heard that from Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers over the years? Well, let's just look at this. This young man entered the country illegally in 2012. He came from Libya. He told people he was fighting against Colonel Gaddafi. And yeah, I know it became state policy to get rid of Colonel Gaddafi, and I'm not here to praise or support the Gaddafi regime in any way at all. But the truth is, of course, many of those who fought against Gaddafi were actually Al-Qaeda / ISIS sympathizers and supporters. There were no grounds to give this guy asylum, no grounds to give him refugee status, and yet, after 6 years of being illegally in the United Kingdom, he was in 2018 granted asylum. He then began a series of very, very nasty, horrible criminal actions, including racially aggravated assault. You see, racism can go the other way too. He spat at a police officer, abused a police officer, behaved appallingly in court, made it perfectly clear, him and his brother too, made it perfectly clear they absolutely loathed and reviled this country. So I think we should spend a bit less time criticising our security services, questioning whether this actually was more to do with mental health than any other issue. There is one very simple reason for what happened in Reading, and goodness me, we've seen it before, haven't we? London Bridge attacks, bombings at the Manchester Arena. Again and again and again, we see this pattern, and very often it is people who have come to this country from Libya. The fault lies firmly, squarely with the British government. We are weak. We are pathetic. We don't send people away who fail to get asylum. We just allow them to keep applying and appealing until in the end they pretty much get what they want. That's where the fault lies. Now, part of it, of course, is the Human Rights Act, something Tony Blair brought into this country. It was, of course, the incorporation of the EU code into our law. And I think we've got to have a serious think about this. Do we want a human rights system, or do we want liberty and freedom? The difference is fundamental and it's important. Either you're born a free person and the state makes laws that prohibits you from doing certain things, so you're allowed to do everything unless a specific law says you can't do something, or we live in a sort of Code Napoleon, EU dream, a sort of Napoleonic system whereby the freedoms and liberties that we have are given to us by the state in the form of human rights. And my analysis of the Human Rights Act since it's come into being is it does more for those that perpetrate crime than it does for those that are the victims of crime. And let's just think about the 3 families and sets of friends directly affected by what's happened in the last couple of days. So I think we need a government that's got resolve, a government that is prepared to either get rid of the Human Rights Act in its entirety, or certainly, at the very least, to amend it. The idea we couldn't send this person back to Libya because he might not be safe in Libya. Well, what about the safety of British citizens? What about the fact that it's the first duty of government to protect its own citizens? So please, Boris, no more bleating, no more head shaking, No more saying we must learn the lessons. We've heard it just too many times over the course of the last few years. And of course, myself, in the last month, I have seen face to face, up close, young men, because 80% of those that come across the channel are young men between the ages of 18 and late 20s, and many of those are coming from Libya. They are all young men of fighting age. I have no idea how many of them believe in ISIS philosophy. I've no idea how many of them might have been fighting for ISIS that got defeated in that war when they lost their caliphate. I don't know. You don't know. Our security services, even if they do know, just simply haven't got the resources to monitor everybody. The alternative, of course, would be to intern tens of thousands of people, and I don't want to live in a country that needs to do that. Far more sensibly is to say we will not allow a single person that comes to Britain illegally, if they've transported here from a safe country, going right back to the 1951 Geneva Convention declaration on where somebody should claim refugee status. We've got to make it clear that nobody that comes here illegally will be allowed to stay. And until we have a government that does that, until we have a government that actually wants to be a little bit conservative for a change, nothing's going to get better. And, you know, we've got a conservative government in name only. They've got a majority of 80 in the House of Commons, a country that wants this to be changed, and yet they have done, so far, absolutely nothing about any of it. And, you know, I'm sorry to say, more of this will happen. More boats will cross the channel this week, of course, because the weather forecast is very good indeed. And I know there's been a fair bit of speculation about my trip to America. So let me just try and settle some of that. I was invited to go out to Tulsa for the first Trump rally, invited by some people who were involved in the campaign. I did, you know, put my head very much over the parapet in 2016 to support Trump for the presidency. Everybody thought I was mad, not for the first time, but I was pleased that I did it. And I went to Tulsa because I wanted to show from the very start that I believe Trump, and whatever faults or imperfections you can find in him, whatever you think about some of his tweets, some of his comments, the fact is, here is somebody with the moral courage to stand up against this mad, lunatic, far-left wave that we're seeing right across the Western world. You know, tearing down statues, rule by mob. We even heard yesterday that a statue of former President Teddy Roosevelt has even been removed from a museum. This attempt to completely erase history, it just cannot be allowed to continue. And very interesting, all the comments about Nelson Mandela, that he kept up, you know, when he was running South Africa, he kept up the photographs, even of the apartheid period. Leaders of South Africa saying we may not like all of our history, but we simply can't erase it. It's a great pity we haven't got someone like Nelson Mandela around involved in world politics today. So I went to the States, I turned up at Heathrow, I had no idea whether I was going to be let into the country or not. I was, and whilst I was there, I was tested for coronavirus. I came back into Heathrow this morning. I went straight to the clinic. I've been tested for coronavirus again. I'm negative, so I'm not a risk to anybody. I am supporting President Trump all the way. I do actually think that without him, I worry that other Western leaders will not have the courage to face up to the radical left, to face up to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. And certainly, I don't see our Prime Minister standing up to any of these things. Just maybe a re-elected Donald Trump can do it. The rally itself in Tulsa was not a complete, huge, overwhelming success. It was the first rally of the campaign, difficult after months of offices not being full of people. They've got some lessons to learn. They've got some progress to make. But I still very much believe, whatever the polls say, that Trump can still do it. The idea of Biden becoming the leader of the free world, given that he can barely string a sentence together and given that he would effectively be a puppet of this new radical left, is just too much to contemplate. So back to the start. appalling what we saw in Reading. I condemn violence of all kinds, whether it's extreme left or extreme right, or whether in this case it is a young jihadi that hates everything about this country. It's about time we said we're not going to let anyone else like this, who poses this risk to us, into this country ever again. A Conservative Prime Minister with a majority of 80 needs to act. But don't hold your breath.